felt like I was the one showing up, but nobody else was showing up. When I stopped texting and stopped reaching out first and stopped showing up that way, people just stopped doing. I just didn't hear from them again. And it hurt. It really did. Mentor, coach, phenomenal man. He said, relationships have seasons. And I never knew I needed that conversation until I had it. But there's a reason why God doesn't just take you straight from the, what we would call the pit to the palace. If we're talking about Joseph, right? Like, there's a reason God didn't do that. It's because you can't handle it. Like, stop it. God still provides even in the midst of transition. And catch this. It may not be the provision that you preferred, but it's provision. Ooh. Yeah, y'all may not like this. See, God is not just after you having something new as it relates to you being removed from something that was toxic. He's also helping you wanting to understand what it means mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to become healthy again. And I wonder, when are we going to begin valuing our own health more than our own statuses and us arriving to something different? When are we going to start valuing our own health just as much as God desires to value our own health? It's interesting because it's in that space where you begin to think that if it's better or it was better where you previously were. And I just want to tell you, whatever you do, don't go back. Whatever you do, don't go back. I don't care if they have filet mignon back there. If the filet mignon was attached to dysfunction, don't go back. I would say this much. It is better to start over and struggle than to remain and be dysfunctional. Starting over is a risk. But I think it's a risk that is worth the reward of your healing. Yo, it's late night pod up in this piece. What's happening? Welcome to what is the season finale of season 1 of our podcast. I'm so excited that you joined us. Clearly, you clicked because you are wondering whether or not you should start over. Or you're in the process of starting over from ground zero. Relationships, business, strategies, life, just starting from ground zero everywhere. And if you are living in this real time, you know how frustrating and difficult starting over can be. Having to get used to new experiences, doing things on your own, maybe doing things that you probably haven't found yourself doing in a long time. The smallest tasks that seem like the hardest outcomes, that seem like the hardest challenges, because you're just relearning so many different things. You've come to the right place, because starting over is first and foremost a sucky experience. And I think I want to validate that more than anything, but I also want to actually add some perspective shifts to it, because even though it can be a sucky experience, it can also be a refreshing experience. And I think it's all about the perspective that you carry towards starting over, what that looks like, what's available to you, what opportunities are present in front of you, and how you want to move forward there. And so I think one of the things that we have to really establish in this conversation is that there are typically two lanes that most people who find themselves starting over fit in. And this is more towards why starting over is typically a challenge in not just the relationship space, but just in life in and of itself. Number one is the lane where you are afraid of the unknown and being in a place of uncertainty, not knowing how things are going to look, and very skeptical of outcomes that are potentially present if you choose to leave what you're used to, no matter what the object of familiarity is. You are like, I would much rather stay put. Like, starting over just doesn't make sense. It doesn't look good, doesn't look favorable, looks scary, looks hopeless and helpless, looks like there's just a lot of A lot of valleys, less hills. A lot of more pain, less promise. And so I'd rather stay. Then there's the perspective where starting over doesn't make sense, less out of the fear of unknown, more out of being extremely comfortable. You're extremely comfortable where you are. Um, there's no struggle, there's no tension, there's no conflict, there is nothing pushing you. And because you're in this space of comfortability, starting over just looks like the last thing you would want to do. We're in a good rhythm, we're in a good place. Why would I want to abandon this? And maybe it's in the format of, well, it's been working for me up to this point, so clearly it has some kind of benefit to it. Maybe that's a perspective you carry. Maybe there's an idea, especially when we're talking about dealing with ourselves as individuals, where there's specific attitudes, approaches, beliefs, principles, values that you might have subconsciously been carrying that maybe haven't necessarily produced a problem for you, but they also haven't been the direct reason for helping you, to getting you to where you are, to getting you to maybe the status and the thinking spaces that you're carrying today. And in those both lanes, in two of those lanes, whether you are afraid of starting over due to the unknown, or starting over just doesn't make sense because of your comfortability, both of those perspectives carry something in common. And that is a view that starting over is often seen as a negative thing. Starting over doesn't seem to carry as much value, because what's the blessing in trying to relearn, trying to unlearn, or trying to have new experiences? Like, what's the blessing behind actually trying something new, doing something different, thinking different, behaving different? What is beautiful about having to unpack all of these wounds that I've tried my hardest to bury up to this point? Like, what's the use? I feel like I'm starting from ground zero. I feel like I'm having to revisit those experiences, having to revisit those conversations, having to dig up old stuff that isn't seemingly beneficial. I mean, we're so far removed from the argument. We're so far removed from the loss. We're so far removed from that marriage that didn't work out. We're so far removed from that argument. We're so far removed from that particular day or particular event that made me feel some sort of way. Like, what's the point in bringing it up now? It's 14 years gone, 10 years gone, 5 years gone, 5 days gone, 5 weeks gone. Like, why? Why? And all of these questions are very prevalent and things that I really think about when it comes to the discussion of starting over, because there seems to be a common ground where there's less curiosity and maybe more furious approaches, maybe more condemning approaches, maybe just more approaches where it's like, what's the point? What's the use? And I would just rather stay where I am, no matter how dysfunctional, how challenging, how awful it may be, all for the sake of not upsetting what's happening around me. Even if upsetting it is the answer, even if upsetting it is the direction, even if upsetting it actually could bring some form of restoration. And I think my question that I have for you throughout the entire conversation that I really want you to just write down, I want you to keep in front of you, is, what do you stand to gain from starting over? What do you stand to gain from starting over? Because I think if you ask this question and you look at the opportunities that are presented to you from starting over, I don't necessarily want to give you the permission to leave something that's healthy and helpful. I don't want to necessarily give you permission to abandon something that requires work. Like, if there's one thing that relationships require, is work. I don't think you should ever expect to walk into anything long-term, marital, or anything that is going to take time, I don't think you should walk into it with expectations of it's supposed to be smooth sailing the whole way. We are all human beings who are resources and not the source. And because we all have our own baggage that we bring into the relationship and into the connection, I think it's up to us to be willing to partner together to actually unpack what we're both bringing at a little bit at a time, with process and with time, that actually, even though it shines a light on who we really are, it exposes where we really are. Relationships easily expose what we are capable of, what we're not capable of, what we have the capacity for, maybe what we thought we had the capacity for, but we actually don't. Relationships have a tendency to put pressure and shine light on those things, not in a means of condemnation or destruction, but in a means of actually helping us see, okay, this is where I am. And then this is more of what this relationship may be demanding out of me. And so I have to be willing to find a way to build the capacity to support this in order for this relationship to become even healthier in the future. I don't want you to look at this conversation and say, okay, yeah, I should then be willing to just start over at any given moment. I should be willing to start over when things are going good, because it's just not good enough. I should be willing to start over if things are not going as well for a few moments or for a particular season. Like, I think you just put this where the shoe fits. You know what I'm saying? If the shoe fits for this, that's beneficial, but I don't want you to really apply this everywhere, because I don't think everything requires a complete start over, in the sense of us having to restart relationships, breakups, divorces, going to extreme lengths. Sometimes it can just be, hey, I need to start over my entire process of actually building my emotional intelligence, building the capacity to regulate and self-regulate, being able to deal with my bad habit of poor speech and poor word choice, actually learning what it's like to, be quiet because this is the best thing available, and not trying to integrate that into believing that because I'm quiet, now somebody is taking advantage of me, or now that I'm quiet, now that I'm seen as weak, right? And I don't want to do that, so I have to come in and dominate the conversation. I have to come in and dominate everybody in the room. Like, there's so many different things that we can unpack in this whole conversation, but those are the things that I don't want you to walk away with, because that in no way, shape, or form is what we're saying. What we are saying, though, is that as we're navigating a season where we're feeling like starting afresh is the only option, when starting afresh seems like it's the best course of action to get healthy again, to be a healthy person, to actually step into a life that God really desires us to live, which is a healthy life, then we have to really, really, really unpack what starting over looks like, but then more importantly, land somewhere where we're understanding that starting over has its perks, has its benefits, and has its wins. And so I definitely want to start with a quick just reference and story, and then lead into some points here. I remember at one point or another having to start over when it came to relationships. At least I felt like I had to hit that restart button. I remember being in my earlier college days and just kind of experiencing a lot of that struggle with transitions, much like maybe other friends experience. But more importantly, I think it's so common among us that's 20-year-olds. If you're anywhere in your 20s, you're experiencing college, you're experiencing your early life as a young adult. There's a lot of struggle in those transitions. There's a lot that you're used to being demanded of you. You're used to having structured for you. You're used to having already made. You knew and expected where things were coming from each and every day, from grade school to when you graduated from your senior class to when you went to college and you, again, entered a higher order in freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, so on and so forth, graduate, honors, whatever, right? And you knew exactly what was happening. You knew the class setup. You knew when you had to be at class, when class let out, right? You knew who was going to be in class. You knew your instructor. You knew the assignments, you knew the due dates, you knew when to turn them in, you knew when it was too late, you knew when your tests were coming up. Same thing in college, just like you had in your social life, right? You went to a specific campus. It's bigger, so much more people, but you kept it real with the few friends that you connected with. And so obviously you're used to connecting with people out of the pool that's given. And so this is how a lot of the relationships are cultivated. But what's crazy is in this same section, right? Not just focusing on school and all those kinds of things. You just end up experiencing these transitions where, you have to start coming into your own, and you're starting to learn what it's like to make decisions for yourself, to choose your own friendships and relationships. And people growing out of certain spaces in life once they graduate college, maybe they're already in college, but they're married, they're having children, they're starting families, they're moving on. And you start to slowly see that gap between where you are and maybe where other people were that you considered close friends, who are now just in different lanes of life. And so it can be really struggling because you start to question the legitimacy of the friendship, the relationship. You're trying to, in some ways, just in plain speak, try to figure out who's real and who's fake, or at least that's how you interpret those things. And a lot of stuff is starting to be taken personally in some aspect, but then there's also just the fact that it's hard, like trying to make new friends. What does that look like, starting from ground zero? And then all the anxiety that builds up, the depression that can come about it, the deep sadness and sorrow that comes from losing these friends and relationships, transitions that you didn't expect, and people just moving on with their lives. And so that happens across the board. And I fell victim to that as well. I was not exempt from that. And I remember going through my early stages in college where a lot of the friends that I carried in high school just simply weren't the same, weren't available. We weren't as close. Friends were growing up, growing out, moving forward, dating, getting married, just doing their own thing, moving out of state, going to college, to different areas. And so it was a struggle for me, man, because I was just so used to those group of friends being available, being around, having access to them, talking to them all the time in the school hallways. And now in a space where we're all kind of just dispersing, it was a challenge. And, I remember being a part of a development program with a particular coach in which I joined his program. And one of the days was just really addressing some of the context, some of the friends, some of the people that we just really needed to have conversations with that we felt were appropriate to the relationships that we wanted to carry. And this was my first time ever doing something like this. I've typically come from a background, and I definitely understand where I get it from the home dynamic that I grew up in, the familial dynamic that I grew up in, and some of the traits that I picked up on, but they just left stuff up in the air. We didn't really address a whole lot, talk a whole lot. And so me being put in a position where I had to really do something that was extremely hard, just be not confrontational in a negative way, but just really, really approach something that I felt was heavy on my heart that I wanted an answer to. It was a first, and it was hard, but I did it. And of course I had to do it in order to go on to the next day. And I think it was only a list of about 10 people, but I might have done more, especially as the conversations kept rolling in. But, oh, guys, the responses I was getting, I felt like it was a slap in the face. I felt like I was just being like, wow, so all of that for nothing. Okay, got it. I felt like I was the one showing up, but nobody else was showing up. When I stopped texting and stopped reaching out first and stopped showing up that way, people just stopped doing. I just didn't hear from them again. And it hurt. It really did. The responses I got from being busy to life, and it was just those common responses that I think never really satisfied. I got a couple responses that I genuinely believed, because the responses that they gave were specific to our relationship and its history. And so it made sense. I was like, okay, nah, for sure. I get that, and then after further questions and trying to see where they were, and then being honest and being like, okay, was this even something that I want to reignite? I mean, what does reigniting it look like? I gave it a try. Obviously, it didn't really come to fruition after that. But, it left me in a place where I was really sour. I was really frustrated. So starting over my relationship circle, starting over my friendship circle, trying to choose new friends, more friends, getting back into that, something I didn't really find myself having to do, at least on my own up to this point in my life. I mean, going through high school, everybody was there, pool of people. I just had to choose. People that were maybe considered popular. I fit in. I was a part of school activities. People knew me, so it was easy, right? It wasn't something that was a challenge or something that I had to actually think about. Okay, well, what do I value in a friend? What the fluff does that mean, right? Like, what do I want in a friend? What makes a friend to me? I have no idea. I'm not really somebody who's picking friends like that, especially just people that I genuinely want to create relationships with. And so, well, I'll never forget, one of my mentors said this as I was really wrestling with a lot of this stuff, and it was weighing heavy on my heart. And I could tell a lot of bitterness was starting to build up, resentment was starting to build up. So it was really hard. But one of the things that he ended up saying that I carry with me to this day, mentor, coach, phenomenal man. He said, relationships have seasons. And I never knew I needed that conversation until I had it. Like, relationships have seasons. And just because the season is up doesn't mean necessarily that they're a bad person. And I was definitely in that lane where I was kind of putting them and grouping them into, oh, these are good people, because I mess with them, they mess with me. These are bad people because they betrayed me, they turned on me, they left me, they stopped hanging out with me, they stopped talking to me, they stopped connecting with me, they no longer cared. When COVID was hitting, they never responded, they never reached out. So, I felt some type of way. I took all of that personally. And when he said that, there was such a level of release that came over my heart and over my life, because for the first time I was actually given perspective to what relationships actually look like. Because for the longest, it never clicked for me that people could talk for a while, not talk for even longer, and then you would hear people come together and say, well, we met up and it's like we never left. I was like, man, we're two different people. How do we do that? Talking with people who considered friendships so loosely, like, that bothered me, especially from the culture that I came from, where there was just a lot of looseness to relationships. Everybody was given titles, but those titles meant less and less the more and more they were given out. And putting that into perspective really helped me to navigate relationships in a healthier way, to live more in what it's like to have relationships with an open hand and not cling to them or try to cling to certain outcomes as if the only way the legitimacy of this relationship is available is if I get this outcome, if I get what I'm envisioning, if I get the best available outcome. And I'll never forget that conversation because it freed me from so much resentment and anger that I was carrying. And that was the time I had to start over, though. Even though that relationship conversation was so healthy and helpful to me, I still had to come to the realization that I got to start over. And, starting over was challenging. It took me a while to get a grip of it because, it was kind of like, okay, well, where do I start? Like, where do I go? Where are people hanging that I can just make friends, that I can just meet new people? What's the pool looking like that I'm actually out here able to connect with new people and, just build relationships? Like, what does that look like? And a lot of this came from trial and error. A lot of this came from bumping my head. A lot of this came from, just doing different avenues. I mean, y'all, I kid y'all not, I used dating apps at one point and I put in my bio, I'm just seeking for friends only, as if that was helpful. But I did, because I was legitimately trying to find out, okay, what does this look like? And so it was a really interesting, pivotal season of my life. And I find it just as interesting that in that same season of life, as those friends fell off, it made more room for God to really connect me with people that I didn't even know I would connect with on such a deep level, that actually would project me, push me closer into my calling, closer to becoming the man he's always called and created me to be, in ways like never before. And it all started with my connections to my mentors and coaches, and then getting into groups, and then getting connected with other people, learning so much about myself, about others, just getting implemented into so many different systems. That was extremely helpful. And so my whole point in sharing all of this brief story is that starting over, in a lot of ways, as struggling and as painful, as maybe filled with I don't knows as it is. It isn't something that has to be the worst experience. And I think there's great benefit to starting over for quite a few different reasons. And I think you're going to want to stick around, especially with some of these biblical references that we have, because I think it's going to make sense in the end. I want you to first take your attention to Exodus, because this is a phenomenal book of transitions, a phenomenal book that just highlights a massive transition in the story, in the biblical story as a whole. When we're talking about God's people in Israel who have been enslaved by Egypt, by the Pharaoh, and basically Moses being called to deliver them out of this slavery. My knee just hit the table. Don't worry about that. Tall people problems. So, this is so interesting though, because, Moses is used by God. The plagues are performed and the people are ultimately delivered, right? God splits the Red Sea. Pharaoh and his people chase after them. Moses and the people get across and the sea falls. Pharaoh and his leaders, no more, right? And so this leads us to Exodus chapter 16 and 17. And this is such a unique time. And actually, I want to take you to chapter 15, because this is actually the first time that we kind of see this, because now these people, and I just want to set the stage, these people have been enslaved for 400 years. Enslaved for 400 years, which means they only know one specific way of living for 400 years. 400 years of punishment, 400 years of captivity, 400 years of a specific way of living, being told what to do. Everything is mundane. Same thing, just a different day. Like it is a repetitive experience that these people are going through, not just in their physical living, but also when you think of the mental and emotional impact that being enslaved by Egypt has created. They are wounded and have been rewired to the experience they had that became their new normal. And because this became the new normal, what they are about to walk into as it relates to this Exodus is about to be game changing, because they've never experienced God, one, in this way, the God of Israel, right, as he would later refer to himself as throughout the book of Exodus and then the other books of the Torah. But they've never just experienced divine intervention like this. Like this has not been something that many nations, all nations around Egypt, around Israel, could even attest to. The idea that a God would literally split a Red Sea, that's not even something that they've seen, because most of the gods, polytheism that is centered in this text culturally, they have seen things that just don't pale into comparison. Like they don't ever see or feel as if a God is actually present with them. But this God, the God of Israel, Yahweh, Elohim, like he shows up and changes the game. And the word goes around, right? And God eventually says this. He's like, yeah, he was going to do all these things, from the plagues to the splitting of the Red Sea, so that his name would be known, right? And so besides getting into all that study, I want to take you to Exodus 15, verse 22. And this is so beautiful. Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled in this desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink, so they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Verse 24, then the people complained and turned against Moses. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink. And so this is a unique pivot, because this also is going to reveal that even though Israel was in captivity for 400 years, there's some things about this captivity that they are reminded of that makes them go, well, dang, at least we had this, that, and the third, even in a dysfunctional setting. At least we had it, right? At least it was something that we had access to. For example, water. Like going 3 days without water. I mean, shoot, even when they were slaves, at least they had water, and it was access to them 24/7, or at least, they had access to it in different stages and blocks of the day. But regardless, it wasn't something that they went a consecutive amount of days without, at least to possibly my current knowledge of the text and its context. And so this is interesting. 3 days without water. What are we going to have to drink? They're already beginning to lean into this complacency or complaining idea or complaining spirit, but only because it's just not what they're used to. It doesn't stop there, because then we go into Exodus chapter 16. That opens up the entire chapter. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, and 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. Listen to what they say in verse 3. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted, but now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. So they are in an unfamiliar territory, experiencing God in a way like never before. They are still wired and programmed from previous spaces, such as Egypt, that they have been wired to function in, which is nothing but dysfunction. Even though they were fed, even though they were given water, even though they were given resources, it still was a toxic, dysfunctional experience. And because it's what they're used to, here they are. If only God would have killed us back there, because at least back there, we had meat, we had bread, we had water, and here we just out here stranded. And so there's a lot of frustration that comes about it. And, I think this is a good place to just insert in this conversation the first point that you find yourself experiencing even deeper when it comes to starting over is that you find yourself in a place of discontentment. This is a good sign that you're in a space of starting over, or that there's something that is being tugged on you to perhaps start afresh in, because there is a serious level of discontentment that's taking place. These people have been complaining. They're used to having food, resources, water at their disposal, even in a land that's toxic and dysfunctional. And it's actually keeping them from, in some way, shape, or form, being appreciative of where they are, even though they're in freedom, because they don't even know they're free. They just don't even know they're free. And proof of it is because of how much they're still thinking about what life was like in Egypt. Even though here is without chains, it's also without food and water, at least until God gets ready to provide. And yeah, I think discontentment is a huge deal. Because if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves complaining about things that we've asked God to deliver us from. Like, if we're not careful, we will find ourselves in a place where we are more willing to complain about what we lack instead of actually see the abundance that's available in front of us. If we're not careful in this space of discontentment as it relates to us starting over, we're experiencing something that maybe we weren't expecting. We were experiencing something that perhaps God brought us out of. God called us out of that relationship. God gave us a huge break. God was looking out for us at the simple fact that what happened. And as a result, now that we know who this person really is compared to who they portrayed themselves to be, we had an opportunity to leave. We took it. And now we're on our own. Now we're experiencing singleness again. Now this relationship has led us, the brokenness of this relationship, the breakup, the separation, the loss of the job, whatever it is, it's pushed us into this lane where we're experiencing something way different than what we ever had before. And it's brought about a level of discontentment, because what we thought we had in some way, shape, or form, we're convincing ourselves was a little bit better than what we have now. And what I want to really encourage you in this space of discontentment is that what we cannot do is have it both ways. We cannot ask God, seek God, for him to intervene, for him to dwell, for him to step into whatever situation that we asked him to step into. We cannot get into a posture of prayer inviting the heavenly realm to invade our earthly realm. We cannot ask God to take us out of something. And then when he does it, find a reason to be upset at the fact that he literally did what we asked him to do. Even if it wasn't in the manner that we asked him to do it, it still got done. We can't have it both ways. And I think much of the struggle that many experience in starting over, especially from a spiritual foundation, is that, well, I did want to get out of that relationship and I did want to get out of that situation, but I didn't think it would be like this. Like, I didn't think I would be in a drought like this. I didn't think all of this hurt and pain would flood me like this. I couldn't have seen it coming. And I think this is just one of those moments where we are able to look back and be mindful that the same God that brought us out of that is the same God that is sitting here with us in the midst of this mess that we're calling process, that is actually inviting God to rewire us and transform us in this process. Because it is a process. Like, again, I want you to take note, even though Israel is in a strong discontentment space, God delivered them from Egypt in a moment. It didn't take anything from God. God did that in a blink of an eye. It was more so what he did in the crash course of the next 40 years that actually makes a massive difference, because they are now giving God permission to deal with the emotional and mental warfare, unwiring and untying all that came with the dysfunction they were connected to. And so discontentment is something that is easily spaced in this, right? And I know I said that was my first point, but here's my real first point. Okay. I know I said that in my first point, but that's just a sidebar to some of the emotions that we might be experiencing in the starting over. Because here's the real point. Here's the real thing I want you to get. Becoming dependent on God for your needs. That is the real point. The real first point is having to depend on God like never before. And just like we see Israel in a new environment, complaining and having to depend on God for something that they may have had access to them as such an easier way or such more of previously in bondage, it's uncomfortable, clearly uncomfortable, and it's extremely challenging. And, you know, it's interesting because it's in that space where you begin to think that if it's better or it was better where you previously were. And I just want to tell you, whatever you do, don't go back. Whatever you do, don't go back. I don't care if they have filet mignon back there. If the filet mignon was attached to dysfunction, don't go back. If the filet mignon was attached to you being constantly mistreated, then don't go back. If the filet mignon was attached to you not feeling like you had room to be who God uniquely designed you to be in that connection, don't go back. Like, it's crazy how much we will reference and we will sit and park our lives at this aspect of spinning the block on friendships, on people, on jobs, on statuses, as if spinning the block always works. It doesn't. And the biggest factor that it doesn't is because while you did all the healing work, other people that you're spinning the block towards, good chance they didn't. Good chance you're running back to somebody who never did the work and hasn't changed. And then what's crazier is we think because we've done the work and healed, we think we have the power to change them. That's all wrong. You just don't. You don't got the juice like that. Neither do I. We don't have the juice like that. And so we have to be willing, man, in such seasons like this, you know, where we have to just be willing to stand in this space of understanding that we are experiencing God at a whole new level. And the privilege, the blessing in experiencing God in a whole new level is it actually entices our intimacy in him. We start to wake up in different ways like we never seen or never felt, never experienced. We start to see things in different ways and in different lanes than we ever have before. Our intimacy with God becomes more alive, and that's all God, because now we're experiencing what it's like to take a risk with God. You know, we're always talking about God, give me more, God, give me more, but we never consider that the way God may give more may consist of God taking something from us. Like, we may never consider that what God is actually going to do when we invite him and more of him into our life is he starts pushing stuff out of our life that maybe we've clinged to, that we've made an idol, we've made our identity, we have easily clinged to for some sort of meaning. God finds a way of just nudging that stuff out, nudging it out. And when we start experiencing without, we start experiencing withdrawals. We start experiencing hunger pains for those things that are no longer available in our lives in this next season. It's where we have to depend on God more. And can I tell you, that is where God desires us most, is when we are so dependent on him that he's the provider of our needs, and we don't find our security in things that are away from God. Especially coming from a first world country, y'all, we understand. If you're watching this and living in America, you understand to some degree through the accesses, through the money, through the statuses and positions, through what's available to you on a 24/7 basis. Like, there's so many things that we possibly have our own struggles in. But when it comes to first world problems, I don't know if there's anything else that screams to a bigger struggle than perhaps comfortability, than perhaps leaning on other things, you know, external resources like money and statuses as some form of security, identity, social media as some kind of identity. You know, an identity crisis is alive and well in today's culture, because if we're not trying to get it through the money and the positions, we're trying to get this through social media, the likes, the comments, the shares. We're trying to get on everybody's platform. We're trying to capitalize with everybody reacting to everything. And we're all trying to find some way, shape, or form to be seen. And because our ability to create healthy, intimate relationships face to face have declined, especially since COVID, it's like, okay, well, the way that I need to be seen is I just need to record this video and put it on social media, airing out all the laundry, airing out all the trauma that I haven't processed, airing out all the breakup that I'm just now experiencing. This person literally just ended the relationship an hour ago, and I'm coming to TikTok and explaining to my TikTok audience why we broke up, and trying to, in some way, shape, or form, teach something that I don't even know what I'm teaching, because this is my experience and this is the first time I'm actually under this. But instead of actually healing in a space where I can actually let some things out, I can actually get some positive, helpful, transformative feedback, not just somebody who's in the comment section validating every feeling as if my feelings are truth, but actually getting into a place where I can heal. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to social media to be seen. Like, we have to really consider, that there are some situations that God puts us in and God allows in our lives as a means for us to reconnect with him. And if we really value God in our lives, like we say we do, please believe that you are not above this experience in some way, shape, or form. As you continue to walk with God, there are going to be some things that God is going to separate you from. God is going to possibly bring you out of. God is going to possibly introduce this transition to you where you are exiting out of something. And in the midst of exiting out of it, you are going to start losing things, but it's where you lose that you actually gain, because you gain the source, losing resources, but you gain the source who is in control of all resources, who's able to replenish you with what you've lost and then some, if we're willing to stick with them. And the challenge isn't that we're sticking with him as long as we can have our needs met, right? We're not sticking him for as a means to an end, but we're rather saying, Lord, whether you give it or you don't, I'm here. And I think that is probably a really uncomfortable reality for us as believers, especially processing what it looks like to start over, because dang God, like, I knew it would be crazy, but I didn't know it'd be this crazy. Like, at least back there, I knew I had my stuff covered. At least back there, when I was living with that person that wasn't my actual spouse, it was just somebody that was a boyfriend or girlfriend. Shoot, I mean, we were partnering on the groceries, the bills were split. It was a lot lighter load. I was a lot more comfortable. But now that I'm trying to do things your way, not only did we break up as a result of us moving out and creating distance like I thought we would, but now I'm in my own space. The bills are crazy. I have to cover everything on my own. It's a struggle. It's a hassle. And to be honest, God, I don't really know what things look like on a month-to-month basis, week-to-week basis. God, I don't know what this business looks like because I'm choosing to trust you. And even though that job brought a level of security, I know, God, for a fact that you were leading me to make a transition, and this transition came at a cost. And so I don't really know what to do. This is where we are finding ourselves in a lane of starting over. And if there's one thing that we can learn from these references of scripture, is that even though they complain, God still met their needs. Now, this does not mean that God wants to always hear us complain. It doesn't mean that God permits us to complain. We have to be willing to turn that complaining into a space of gratitude. This is why daily gratitude makes sense, and it's helpful because it helps regulate our minds even in the midst of seasons of starting over. But it's actually a promise that we can lean on, that even in the midst of such a tough transition, God will provide. It may not be in the manner that you expect him to provide, but trust when I tell you, he does provide. He does provide. And as we continue to lean forward into him, when we continue depending on him, even if we're in a season where all we have is him, because everything that's happening is a result of him just not allowing certain things, we have to continue to lean in on God and remind ourselves that he is the capacity. He has our needs in control. And when we begin to depend on God for our needs and depending on God from that day-to-day experience, Lord, I don't know what you're going to do here. I don't know how you're going to do it. That's when we know, man, that we're really growing closer with God. I think in my early experiences of this, in my own space, I think one surefire moment to know that you are operating in what God desires for you, no matter how challenging it is when you're just filled with more and more I don't knows. Like, Lord, I don't know. And it seems so opposite, right? Because we're so indulged in prosperity. And if you obey, God will do this, and the third. And even though it's not to say that God won't do those things, sometimes we have stretched and stressed that so much that we begin to believe in a version of God that's all about the now instead of a God that's all about process. And it can be a struggle because it doesn't really match up the life that we're living behind the scenes. And it causes us to question so much because we just don't hear a lot about how God operates and navigates through process as much as we hear about God doing everything in the moment right now. He's going to deliver you from your struggle right now. He's going to deliver you from your sickness right now. He's going to deliver you and your debt right now. He's going to give you a job right now. And that's not to say that God can't do that, but at the same time, man, I just think we got to be willing to slow down on some of that, because as we're clearly looking at this, yes, God delivered them in the moment. But the process that it took for them to be delivered mentally and emotionally still took some time. And sometimes what we have to realize in the midst of starting over, what actually is prevalent in the struggle of starting over is the fact that we have to start willingly leaning into the invitation God gives us, where he's working on restoring us mentally and emotionally from the experiences that we've been delivered from. It's not so much that God doesn't want to bring something new into your life, as much as it is the fact that sometimes in the process of delivering you from something that was causing you great harm mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially in your life, God also wants to deal with the programmings that you attached yourself to in that season that will no longer apply where you're going. And the longer that we are unwilling to submit to that, I think the longer that process will feel, the more heavy it becomes. And it's just such a challenge. It is such a challenge. It is such a challenge, and none of it gets easier. But I just want you to know that it's in seasons of starting over that we are invited to depend more on God. God shows up. And in the midst of God showing up, we have a lot of things that are exposed about us that in some way, shape, or form were carried from previous seasons that we were in, that God also is interested in working on as well, instead of just immediately taking us from perhaps what we were struggling in to the promised land. Like, it's so crazy. And this is the last thing I'll say on this, because I know I've been harboring on this point. Oh, this just hit me like a ton of bricks. I hope y'all get this, man. You ever wonder and ask yourself why God didn't just give you the version or the promise right after he took you out of something you had no business being in for as long as you were in? Like, you ever wonder why God just didn't give you the marriage with the right person instead of, allowing you to go through a whole process of enduring the breakup and having to heal and recover. You just ever wonder why God didn't just give you the new business or the new job after the old one was let go? I just think one of the things that I'm just actually thinking about in lifetime, which is so crazy, is that it's just because you weren't ready for it. And it's not to say that you weren't qualified, like your credentials aren't qualified. It's not to say that what well, dang God, do you not care? Why have you not answered? How many times have we prayed that? Like, God, do you not care? Why don't you answer? It's not that God doesn't care. It's not that God doesn't see you. It's not that God doesn't want you to have the best or the best that he desires for you, of course. I just think sometimes what we have to take into consideration when it comes to transitions and taking exits in our lives isn't just the physical removement from it as much as it is the mental and emotional aspect to it. And in no way, shape, or form am I trying to share with you, especially when it comes to relationships, that, well, God wants you to be perfectly whole before getting into a new relationship. But I think there's a reason why you don't break up with somebody you've been dating for 4 years and then begin dating somebody 2 weeks after the breakup. I just think that's asinine. I think that's nasty work. I think that's disgusting. And I would argue with you that it's possible God thinks the same thing. Not because he doesn't want you to have a healthy relationship, but because oftentimes, most times, when we are fresh from a disconnection, fresh from a transition that maybe wasn't expected, that hurt, that blindsided, that was extremely challenging, that was emotionally and spiritually, mentally draining, we begin to make decisions out of our wounds. We don't make decisions from healthy places. Here's a better way to look at it. By jumping straight into perhaps what God may have promised on the back end of being released from something that we clung to for so long, we will actually fumble the bag because we won't even appreciate what we have. How many people do you hear talking about how boring people are who are predictable? You can predict their next move. You can predict what they're going to do. You can predict when they're going to show up. You can trust, literally what we're communicating here is you can trust the fact that they're going to show up right when they said they were going to show up. And we label that boring. No, that's not boring. That's just your wound talking. That's just your wound talking, because you're so used to chaos that when you get into an orderly fashioned relationship that is stable, that is healthy, that is communicative, you don't receive that well. And the reason you don't receive that well isn't because you're just the worst person ever, but because your nervous system is so used to chaos that when it comes to something that is more patient and settled, it's freaking out. Your nervous system is freaking out because the entire time of the last relationship that lasted for however long, you began thriving off of that high. You began thriving off of that roller coaster ride that you were always put through emotionally. So you're at an imbalanced state. So your nervous system is communicating to you that this is danger, but in reality, it's not. And it's you have to be willing to get into a process of relearning, of rehearsing, of re-understanding, of unlearning a lot of different things that you carried in that previous connection and relationship that will help you receive what God really wants for you. But there's a reason why God doesn't just take you straight from the, what we would call the pit to the palace. If we're talking about Joseph, right? There's a reason God didn't do that. It's because you can't handle it. Stop it. And you won't really understand that as much until you end up either receiving what God has for you in the end over time, or as you're in the midst of process, you start to look back and you're like, dang, God, I see how much work you've been doing on my heart and mind. And I can tell, I really wasn't ready for what I was really wanting at that time. And I'm so glad you didn't give it to me, because I would have messed it up then. If you have moments like that, you're healing. Lord, I'm so glad you did not give me that relationship, because, oh my Lord, Oh my Lord, would I not have taken care of that like I should have? So I just want to encourage you, man, for those of you who are feeling so behind, you're feeling so left out, you're feeling like God is just forgotten. God is not looking for you. God doesn't care for you. God is not showing up for you. God's answering everybody else, but can't hear you. You're feeling like, wow, Lord, I'm just in a drought. It's dry. Like at least what I had then, I knew I was in some form of stability. At least he had money. At least she had a job. At least she was doing this. Like, come on, Lord. And being in those places, man, I just want you to be aware that the very act of approaching God in that manner shows that there's still some work God is wanting to invite you in on to continue transforming your mind to a healthier, more stable place that is more receiving of him, beneficial according to him, and that actually will help you sustain who you're becoming and where you're going. Because who you're becoming is also important, but I would also argue more important than where you're going. And even though it's hard and challenging, and you want to send that text, and you want to reach back out, and you want to see if it's still active, if it's still real, if it's still available, don't go back. Nah, fam, don't go back. Don't go back. One of the worst things you can do is ask God to deliver you out of something and then go right back to it. Because going back to it is just screaming the fact that it's just something we're used to and we don't want change. We don't want to experience something new. We don't want to do the hard work. We don't want to take on the challenge. And I think that is where growth and transformation is. Not in your ability to try to change somebody, and not in your ability to go back someplace because of its familiarity, thinking that being familiar with dysfunction is better than being uncomfortable in something that's new and freeing. I'm gonna leave that there because I don't even know if I can repeat that again. Here's the second point that I want you to get. I've been laboring on that point. I really had to, I felt like, man, I felt that when I was sharing that. I want you to take a look at the next point, because Exodus 16, verse 1 through 3 that we just looked at, and then verses 13 through 20 is interesting too. This is kind of that caught in the middle space, and this is basically what we've been looking at, and this is what transitions to us because we just talked about it, right? Don't go back. Well, it all happens when you're caught in the middle. There's some tension that you're holding on to here when you're starting over. Well, yes, I want something new. I want something different. I know that I'm not healthy here. I'm not regulated here. And I know that peace is on the other side of this, but gosh, like, I'm just holding on to what this person, at least what I thought they had the potential to be. I'm holding on to some of the resources that they have, and I'm trying to, in some way, shape, or form, rationalize or justify why staying is a good idea, why not leaving, not starting over is a good idea. I'm trying to rationalize and justify my way of telling myself why it's just better to not even address why I behave the way I do, because I know when I start digging at that and picking at that scab, I know when I start doing that, it's only going to erupt. It's only going to cause other problems. And man, I don't want to cause no more problems. I don't want to be another headache. I don't want to keep making people mad. I just would rather shut up and keep silent than to address it and deal with it in real time. And that's kind of like some of that caught in the middle action. And so sometimes what we'll do is either do nothing or we'll resort to going back to familiarity. And gosh, I think this speaks so loud to what Israel does. We just read 16 verse 1 through 3, right? Where they complain, man, it would have been better if God would have killed us back in Egypt, right? They're questioning, why are we even here, bro? It don't even make sense. But look at verse 13. Verse 13 through 20. It's going to be about 7 verses. You got it. You can hang in there. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning, that the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. What is it? They asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, it is the food that the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Then Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. Oh, guys, I need y'all to catch this. I need y'all to catch this. If you're in that transition, you're in that tough season, right? But man, I just feel like starting over was the only option. I had no choice. The relationship ended. The season ended. The season was finished. I didn't want it, didn't expect it, didn't like it, didn't pray for it. Maybe you did pray for it. Maybe you did want it. Maybe you were expecting it, but you weren't expecting the starting over season to look like this. And you're like, yo, there's a part of me that wishes I could go back, because at least going back, it's a little bit more stable. It feels a little safer because it's something I'm used to, even though what I was used to wasn't function. It wasn't healthy. It was dysfunctional, right? Or hey, you know, I would much rather be there because it's just better than living in this place of uncertainty and instability. Like, God can't be in this. How is God in this? There's no way. Well, I want you to take a look at this. I mean, I think Exodus 16 lays out the map, the roadmap for us, in the simple fact that Israel in this transition, not only does God still provide for them, but they're also in this place of instability and uncomfortability too. We just got done talking about how they're expecting meals. They're used to being surrounded by different meals, having access to different foods all over the place when they're in Egypt, even though they were enslaved. Now here they are having to depend on God's provision. And God's provision is what? God's provision is manna, something that was only designed to make it from day to day. Well, I'm leaving a palace and you telling me I got to depend on what? Like, I want y'all to really, really catch this, man. Two things. One, that God still provides even in the midst of transition. And catch this. It may not be the provision that you preferred, but it's provision. Ooh. Yeah, y'all may not like this. It's provision. It's provision. It may just not be your preferred provision. You know? And I think sometimes what keeps us stuck in these seasons where we're steadily frustrated and steadily upset is the fact that, like, we're just not appreciating what God is providing in the midst of the season. We're so focused on the fact that it's not us providing that we can't acknowledge that how God has still provided for us is enough. You know, we still think in some way, shape, or form that we are less than because, I'm not the one doing it like I should be, like I've been trained to believe I should be as a man. Like I grew up, man. And it's just like, no. God has his ways of providing. And it's not so much that we have to find ourselves being the main ones to provide, as much as it is just being so grateful, one, that God desires to use us as means of provision, to be that hand and feet of his. But even if he were to take it away, that doesn't mean that we are less than. It just means that perhaps God has another way of providing. And I really want you to catch these thoughts. Okay. And so, let manna represent what you didn't expect, right? Let manna be something that you maybe not typically would have prayed for, but it's here, right? This is how God wants to provide for you in this season. I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be encouraged. And not only is it still something that you've got to work on, that you've got to still put your hands to cultivate. Because watch this. God provides the manna, but they still got to what? Go gather it. They still have to go gather the manna. They still have to grind those pieces. They still watch this. Oh, this is interesting. Look at this. After this is verse 21. Okay. After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, each family according to its need. And as the sun became hot, the flakes they had not picked up melted and disappeared. And on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. Okay. And then he gives them an explanation on what these things are. I just want y'all to catch this, y'all. They still had to go gather, which means even in a season of transition where it's uncomfortable, it's uneasy, it's unstable. You're depending on God for your needs day to day. You're depending on God for direction day to day. You wake up every day and you're feeling like, Lord, I don't know what this is going. I don't know what's going on. What is this? What? How? Why? We have an opportunity not just to continue to grow closer into depending on God for our needs, but we also get an invitation, y'all. We get an invitation to lean into who he is and the manner in which he's providing. We get an opportunity to really open our eyes to see the value behind what he's providing, right? It may not have been our preferred choice, but it is something that God is choosing to use. And then here's the beautiful thing too. This is the second thing I want you to see, in the fact that he uses manna. Just as we read, they had to pick it up morning by morning, and they couldn't take more than what was necessary because the leftovers would then not be able to be eaten, but turn into maggots. It would rot. I want you to catch this. Oh my goodness. It's also a season starting over, the challenges, the struggles. It oftentimes can be a space where you're experiencing what it looks like to let go. See, God is not just after you having something new as it relates to you being removed from something that was toxic. He's also helping you wanting to understand what it means mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to become healthy again. And I wonder, when are we going to begin valuing our own health more than our own statuses and us arriving to something different? When are we going to start valuing our own health just as much as God desires to value our own health? When? Is it when we get those things? Because like all this grind culture, you're going to mess around and die not even making it to the finish line due to burnout, due to exhaustion. No, don't worry. I don't say this from a place of like I'm better than. I wrestle with this all the time. One of my current struggles in life right now is this thing called a bedtime. Oh, I suck at it. I'm awful at it. I will be up till 3 a.m, whether it's content ideas that are swirling through my mind and I'm recording them, I'm editing, I'm trying to create these apps and all these kinds of things for audiences and people to test out and try and use, just all for development purposes. But y'all, I suck at it. Oh, it's the worst. It's a struggle of mine, and it's something that I have to be extremely intentional of. In fact, right now, as I'm recording this, it's late. You're getting a midnight pass podcast right now. And one of the things that I have to honestly be willing to intentionally grow in is not being so caught up in the grind culture myself and learning how to rest, because rest is a sign of trust. God, I can't depend on it. So this is a way of me, in a way, I guess, leaning on some sort of accountability for myself. The fact that I'm sharing this and I'm saying this, well, now I gotta lock in, right? Because I don't want to be somebody that is guilty of not taking my own thoughts and advice into consideration when it comes to these things, right? So just walk with me. You work with your boy, okay? But like, God is just as interested in those things, man. Just as interested. Just as we just said in our previous point, that God isn't just after you being delivered out of that physical space. Just as we said that, the same thing applies. I know we said it in a different way earlier. I can't necessarily remember, but here it applies too. So I just need y'all to get it, man. Like, this is a time where God is also trying to help you learn new things, relearn some things. Not necessarily saying that this is due to you failing previous tests. Not to say that you are in a wilderness space, or you are in a drought, or you are in a season where you're starting over, or part of you starting over has included wilderness, has included drought. It doesn't mean that you did something wrong. This is just God's way of helping you process what you need to become more in the manner he desires you to become. Like, this is massive, y'all. I wish I could tell it to you better than how I'm explaining it, but oh my goodness, because who you're becoming is way more important to him. And how unmerciful would he be to put you in a situation you're not ready for? I've had to wrestle with this myself. Like, dang, God, I kind of thought you was going to start showing provisions a little earlier than I thought. You know, you kind of told me at the beginning of the year to go, release me, you release me, you release me. I go, here I am, and nothing really has changed. It's interesting. And if you're not careful, you will mistaken God's release as, you know, God also affirming that this is also the timetable that you set that he's wanting to meet you on, that he's wanting to provide through. You'll start putting words into God's mouth. You'll start trying to anticipate God showing up on something he never promised he would. You start attributing things to God that he never said nor committed to. It's all you. And that's something I'm learning. I don't project that onto you. I'm talking to me. Like, I've been through that. I'm living through that. And I think one of the beautiful things, it's so gracious. One of the most merciful things about our Father is that he protects us. He shields us. If we let him, he does it. And we have to be willing to lean into that. We have to be willing to lean into that. And so not only does God still provide, right? And that it's not based on us liking the provision or leaning. We have to learn to not look for our preferred method of provision in order to receive how God's currently providing. But we also have to understand too that there's some things in this season that God is really trying to help us understand more of, relearn, unlearn, right? He's really trying to teach us the math or the madness, or he's really trying to teach us the importance of being able to live with an open hand and letting go. We just said if you held on to too much manna, the stuff will rot. It won't even be any good. Oh man, it won't be any good. So how many things can you look back on as you're starting over in this season, in this moment, from this relationship? How many things can you look back from the relationship that you're separating from the job status that you're separating from, where you're like, dang, I might have held on to it too long. It rotted in my hand and I was actually getting sick spiritually because I was trying to feed off of something that was rotted, that wasn't even available. Their emotional capacity, nah. Mental capacity, rotted. The capacity to continue showing up, to doing the work, rotted. I held on to this too much, thinking that they would change, and I just kept ignoring the signs. I kept ignoring the reality. I kept ignoring the things that they showed me on the first date that I was just like, nah, I can change that. But here we are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years down the road, where now the relationship has come to the end. Marriage has not come out of it. And I'm still looking at it going, dang, I missed it. We held on to something too long. And sometimes the things that we are unwilling to walk away from, God will pry out of our hands. The things that we're unwilling to let go of, God will actually allow to rot. So we would have no choice but to leave it. Because if we were to stay, it would cause nothing more but harm. Man, I wish y'all could get it the way that my brain is computing it right now. But oh my goodness. This text, man, is beautiful when it talks about transitions. Beautiful. Because no, in no way, shape, or form does it get easier, or is it lacking challenge, or is it lacking those things? But these are these moments, y'all, in our walk with God, where not only our intimacy rises, but our resilience is built. Our steadfastness is built. Our ability to remember who God is in the midst of struggling seasons is able to be cultivated into a legitimate skill, where we are actually learning how to regulate ourselves in the midst of seasons that don't look favorable, in the midst of circumstances that don't look like it has a positive outcome. When it's really dark, it's really challenging. God, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how you're doing it. This doesn't make sense. You're telling me to leave. You led me to leave. You closed the door. You keep shutting doors. I don't know why. I don't know how. I don't know. And yet God is constantly reminding us in his text, even here, that even though you don't know, he knows. Even though you can't see it, he sees it. Even though you don't know where the next thing is going to come from, God's already got it orchestrated. And we just have to be willing to continue to lean on him, even in uncomfortable seasons where it doesn't make sense, where it doesn't align, where the math isn't mathing. And sometimes in some seasons, manna will suffice. Manna will suffice. It may not be what you preferred, but it is what God wants to use. It really is. It is what God wants to use. It may not be what you prefer, but it is what God wants to use. I just want you to ponder on that. I want you to meditate on that. It may not be what you prefer, but it is what God wants to use. Okay. So we've been on these points long enough, y'all. I gotta let this go. I gotta let this go. Okay. This is all a part of grief. This is all a part of grief. There are some things in the crash course of starting over you're gonna have to grieve over. And some of it is some of the expectations you had on some of what maybe you thought God was going to do by this point in your life. Some of the grieving is having to let go of what you expected from the person you're having to move on from, that you thought you had a long-term commitment to, that was going to go to marriage. And here you are single again in 2025 and beyond, and you didn't expect it. This is to that job that you lost, that you didn't think you were going to lose, that you didn't think you were next in line for the budget cuts. You get what I'm saying? Like, so many things that we can plug this into. So many things that we can plug this into. And we have to be reminded. We have to be reminded that this is all a part of the grief process. This is all a part of us being able to get back to this place where we are mentally and emotionally stable, because God cares about that too. And it's easy for God to give you what your next is. But God cares so much about you that he's like, man, I would much rather keep that for a later time and work on you getting healthy. Work on your relationships getting healthier. Work on the people you love and care about getting healthier with you. Because at the end of the day, like, for real, at the end of the day, y'all, we got to put the pieces back in the box. The job isn't going to be the thing that you wish you had made more time for when you're on your deathbed. The money isn't something you're going to wish you made more of when you're on your deathbed. When people are at your funeral and they're giving your eulogies and remembrances, they are not going to sit here and talk about how much more money they wish you would have made, how much more time you wish you would have missed out on. No, if anything, it's going to be the relationships you built. It's going to be those experiences that you shared with your loved ones, with your kids, if you're a parent, with your spouse, if you're married, with your family, with your significant others, with others that you built relationships with. Like, those are the things that matter. And sometimes, man, God is looking out for us, man. I know it's a challenge. I know that's not what you want to hear, but sometimes God is looking out for us in our best interest. Because if he were to give it to us today, we would mess it up just as much. We really would. We really would. And I think there's a process that God operates in. And that's why I think that always talking about what God is going to do now and what God can do now sometimes sets us up, man, because we go on praise breaks about that stuff. But we forget that God is a God of process. And that's all throughout the Bible too. And sometimes that process looks like dealing with those mental and emotional struggles that you carried from that place that God has brought you out of and God is pushing you to exit out of, that he wants to help you reshape, that he wants to help detox from you so you can become healthier. But man, we're fighting it, bro. We're fighting it because it's like, God, when are you going to show up? God, any day now. God, hurry up. God, I got these pressures. People expecting so much from me. God, hurry up. Hurry up. Hurry up. And, whew, man, oh man. There was a thought that I heard earlier today in conversation. And it was said straight like this. That, sometimes the suffering isn't just for you. And boy, can I relate to that. Oh my goodness. Sometimes the suffering isn't just for you. Sometimes the starting over isn't just for you. I know it feels like you're going through it alone, but it's not just for you. Because there are so many other things that God is actually moving in the midst of other people around you, that God is shifting, that God is touching. Those idols, those security blankets, right? Those things that we trusted in so much that we put above God, that we got away with for a long time. But now with this transition, with this unexpected experience, it's causing a shift where now everybody else is bothered and struggling with it too, because it's a hindrance. It's affecting them. And we have a way of looking at it. We can go, man, I can keep being mad. I can keep being frustrated. I can keep, clinging on to something that isn't going to change. Or I can just simply be willing to look at this and go, bro, what's the opportunity here? What is God perhaps inviting me into that, man, I'm going to be honest, it's above me. It's out of my hands. It's out of my control. What is God inviting me into that instead of fighting it, I just need to lean into it? I just need to lean into it sometimes. I think that's just from a spiritual place. And so leaving this point, I want you to ask, what are you relearning? What are you unlearning? What are your appetites like? What are you hungry for that you're having to let go of? See, these are things that you want to question and you want to just draw curiosity to. That's going to help you kind of unpack some of this and help you lean more into the starting over. Because I'm telling you, the benefit, we talked about it in the beginning, curious enough about what the benefit, what do you have to gain in starting over? Well, what you have to gain is a greater experience with God. That's the first point, because we depend on God more. But the second point is that we have to gain this emotional and mental, physical regularity that's available, this restoration that's available. What we have to gain is the ability to get the peace back that we left a long time ago in efforts of trying to people please, in efforts of trying to do everything, in efforts of trying to be everything to everyone. We have an opportunity. Oh man, we have an opportunity to learn things that, man, we didn't even have the capacity to really learn because we had so much in our hands prior to. Like we just do. We have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to experience God in a way where we get to see his provision at different heights. We get to see the beauty of how God provides, and how God provides is a lot different than what we expect him to use and provide through. and we just get to experience God on a whole nother level, man. And I think, man, if we're really wanting to be about that life where we say, hey, I want more God, please know that what comes with experiencing God more is being in seasons like this. Being in seasons like this where you just don't know how to do. And so you gotta put your foot to the pedal, and you gotta be willing to do it. You gotta be willing to bump your head while you're doing it. You gotta be willing to fail while you're doing it. You got to be willing to try things and be like, okay, I think that's more consistent with what God was possibly referring to me and sharing with me on my heart. Or, hey, you know what? I tried that and I'm looking at the results. Maybe that wasn't God. And so I might have got that wrong, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that my relationship with God is extremely distant. It doesn't mean I don't know God. It just means, hey, I may have misunderstood what he was actually saying. So let me get back on the saddle and keep leaning closer to him. Like, man, fam. Woo, I gotta go. What are the emotional and physical pains that are possibly being addressed, mental and emotional pains that are possibly being addressed in you in this season? I think that's something worth considering too. You know, what are some things that are causing some very strenuous thoughts and hurts and pains in your mind and your emotions and your thinking? Because I think those are some things that God is actually inviting you to. You know, again, C.S. Lewis says God often whispers to us in our pleasures, shouts to us in our pains. Okay? He whispers to us in our pleasures. He shouts at us in our pain. And those pains that you're experiencing mentally and emotionally, let that be something that God is actually inviting you to, because the pain is letting you know something is off here. Something is wrong. I'm not used to it. This is uneasy. This is uncomfortable. And it's something that God is inviting you to. Gosh, it's something that God is inviting you to. And let me say this while I'm on this point before I get to my last places and really wrap up here. I got a lot of notes here, but I clearly can't go through it all in this pod. I really want to say this here. When you notice people going through these things in their own journeys and experiences of life, they're in these drought seasons, they're in these wilderness seasons, they're in these seasons where they're having to start afresh and start over. If it's not from a relationship that they're having to leave, a job they're having to transition from, they're not in transition somewhere. Perhaps they're having to start over and start afresh with some behavioral patterns and some capacities and some emotional pains and some traumas and just unpacking a lot of stuff. It feels like it's hitting a hard reset because life as you know it isn't the same after you hit this reset button, after you experience this transition. I need you to be that person that just speaks love and life into them. I really need you to be that person that steps up and just supports them, just loves on them, encourages them. When you see them and they're feeling like it seems like it's a long day, it's a hard day, it looks a little heavier, don't be afraid to step in and show them and help them. Not even just give them answers, but just simply be present. Just love on them. Hey, man, I see you. Is there anything that you need from me? What do you need from me right now? Is there anything? How can I help and serve in this space? If there's one thing I've been learning this year, y'all, just in the first 4 months of 2025, it's been crazy. One of the things that I have learned in just the first 4 months of 2025 is that God has really given me the capacity to be present and to show up in the midst of other people. the pains, the hurts that they're experiencing, catching them in the middle, really processing some stuff. I've had amazing conversations with so many people, even in my own family. And, for a while and for a long time, I really wasn't somebody who put myself in that position to speak up and say certain things, because one, I used to think, well, of course they know that, of course they know God loves them. Of course they know that they're okay. Why do they need me to say that? They already know, right? So there's that assumption factor. Then there's that factor where it's like, well, me specifically, gosh, I don't really know what they're experiencing. So because I can't really relate, or I feel I can't really relate to where they're at, what is my words going to do? What is my encouragement going to do? It's not even going to fall on good grounds. It's going to be worthless because I can't relate, and then there's other perspectives where maybe you're just afraid of upsetting them. You're afraid of saying the wrong thing. You're afraid of perhaps, man, I wonder what they're going to think of me after I say this. Man, I'm telling you, I wrestled with all of this. And if there's something I have learned, is that the people, and what I'm still learning, I'm not even going to say I mastered it. I'm still learning as every opportunity shows up, as every conversation shows up, as every struggle and conflict announces itself as abruptly as anything else. Like, if there's one thing I'm learning, it's just that, I don't want to see the people I love slowly die right in front of me. And, people love me and care enough about me. And at least to some extent, I've had somewhat of some decent influence on people to where what I have to say, they will take into consideration. And they will take it into consideration and chew the meat, spit out the bone, whatever you want to do with it. But it is helpful. And man, I got to tell you, man, I've had some hard conversations myself this year with people I never expected I would be in position to share hard conversations with. I've had conversations with people, man, that was just, really refreshing. Not in the sense that it was always a tough one, but maybe it was just something that they needed to hear. Some level of encouragement, some love, especially as men, man, we need it. We need it. Whether you're married, you're single, you got a lot of friends, you're dating, man, life hits hard. Life just hits hard. Life be lifing out here. And I think it's really, really, and we're really in such a crazy, crazy time in this culture where, you don't want, you always weigh how much you want to love or show somebody gratitude or show it for them, or just send them a message telling them that you're thinking of them, you're praying of them, you love them, you care for them, just checking in on people. Because, gosh, I don't want to be a glazer. I don't want to be a glazer. I don't want to be riding on nobody, right? I don't want it to be looking awkward. I don't want it to be weird, and it's so much ego that we're holding on to, man. And I think in this culture specifically, man, we need it now more than ever. We need it now more than ever. So I'm inviting you to join me on that journey, as I'm doing it in my own circles. I'm doing it in my own family. I'm doing it in my own friends. I want you to take on that challenge too. Because sometimes in this season, man, the thoughts will beat you up. Those spaces where you're just thinking to yourself, you're internalizing a lot. Gosh, those thoughts can be heavy. And it doesn't matter how much scripture you know. It doesn't matter how much church you attend. You are not exempt from these experiences. Don't matter how many podcasts you listen to, you are not exempt from these experiences. And they all get heavy. And I think it's a part of being in that community, being a part of people who love you, who care for you, that appreciate you, people that really want to see you and want you to be seen. Like, don't hesitate. Don't be afraid to show up in those spaces for other people. They need you. They need you. They need you. And then, of course, when you're in those situations, communicate that. Let people know where you're at. People that you can trust, right? Because unfortunately, not everybody is a safe space, right? And so we want to be willing to share that with people that we're safe with, so they can know that too. Because dealing with these things alone, it's not the move. It's not the move. And God can't be all you lean on. To all my super religious folk out there, it's, what's that song? Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting that song. Wow. Anyway, I don't want to keep y'all too much longer. Anyway, yeah, all my super religious folk, I always talk about it's just me and Jesus and me. and all I got God, and that's all that mattered to me. It's like, nah, fam. Nah. Prayer is good, so is community. Prayer is good, so is counseling and therapy. Prayer is good, so are brothers and sisters in Christ who can help you, who you can lean on and depend on to help you out of some ruts. Stop doing this alone. I know it's uncomfortable going to your local church. I know it's uncomfortable going into public settings because you got to meet new people and I got to start all over again. Hey, fam, that starting over is so much more better than you suffering in isolation. How many bad decisions can we reflect on that came from places of isolation? Too many. Too many. I'll speak for myself. Too many. So we gotta think about this, man. We really gotta be willing to step out of that comfort zone and be willing to push that needle and get to a place where we're being restored in that way. All right. So I've kept y'all for like an hour and a half at this point. So let me wrap up here. Out of those two things, the third thing that you're experiencing is easy, man. You just feel like you're dying. You know what I'm saying? Like it's really a feeling where not only are we depending on God, not only are we caught in the middle and we're having to invite God into the space where he's reframing us, he is reshaping us, he's divinely intervening, and part of his divine intervention is him taking control, us giving up that control, so many things that we just discussed in that previous section. Also what's a part of starting over is that you definitely feel like you're dying. You definitely feel like yo, this, like, you're thirsty, you're hungry, like you feel like you're crawling. Lord, when is this gonna end? Like, oh Lord, I never thought that the smallest things would be the most difficult now. I never thought that going to a restaurant and ordering my own meal for the first time after being with somebody for so long who always ordered my meals, I never thought that would be so difficult. I never thought it would be so difficult to go through my photo album after our divorce and breakup and separation and see photos of this person that I literally at that point in life thought of the world of. Didn't think it would be that hard, I didn't think it would be so hard to learn what it was like to build friends again, because when I was in that relationship, I cut off all my friends. That person that I was with was my only friend, and now they're gone too. And so, I got to get into a place of community. It just feels like it's a slow death. Everything is just painful. Everything hurts. Everything sucks, and I think, when we look at the next text, I think it's Exodus 17. Let me go back to these notes real quick. Exodus 17, verse 1-3. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of sin and moved from place to place. Eventually, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. Quiet, Moses replied. Why are you complaining against me? And why are you testing the Lord? But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? Like, why'd you do this, bro? Why'd you do this? You consistently are asking God why. Why did you do this? Did you bring me out here to die? Did you bring me out here so I can just be losing everything and literally have nothing? I mean, literally nothing. What are you doing this for? Why? And it feels like a slow death. Everything is losing. Everything is being pruned. Everything is being seemingly cut away and cut off. Not just that, but then it's just the slow death of having to retry and redo and relearn and doing all these other kinds of things that we've talked about previously. And, I think the biggest thing that I want you to get, in questioning this is that even though there is a distinct feeling to want to ask God where he is, I think oftentimes that comes from us experiencing him in probably one of the more uncomfortable settings that maybe we experience him in, and that's silence. Because typically that question, you're not really asking God that question when everything is going well. You're typically asking God that question when nothing seems to be going well. And typically we associate the end result to certain experiences as God being present, right? If the marriage is going good, God is present. But if the marriage is struggling, God's nowhere to be found. Oh, as long as we're bringing in revenue and a good income, hey, God is here. But if he's not, if the revenue isn't there, we're struggling at jobs, we're losing jobs, status is depleting. I don't know if God's really here. And so what's crazy is we've carried this theology where, you know, the results that we get that are favorable means God is there, but the moment we start struggling, we feel God isn't there. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. God is in both as long as we invite him into it. Like, God doesn't go anywhere. You know, God doesn't leave his throne. God is not abandoning. God is not walking away. I think what happens, however, is that we experience those seasons of silence. And I think silence can teach a multitude of things. I don't think I have the capacity to really unpack them all, but I will say this much about silence is that oftentimes, man, it's those areas of silence that we're being invited to really see how legitimate we are really wanting to walk with God. You know, if God, like, because we've trained ourselves to believe that we're entitled to an answer. But God doesn't owe us that. God doesn't owe us that. No matter how much tithes we give, how much times we approach church, how much Bible we know frontward, backward, how much hermeneutics, homiletics, exegesis, eisegesis, no matter how much of that stuff that we learn, man, nah, God doesn't owe us a thing. And I think once we can overcome that uncomfortable truth, I think it actually becomes a little bit easier to cling to God, because now we don't come to God in this sense of entitlement, like, God, you owe me, as if this is not the same God that literally is giving you life to breathe, air to breathe in your lungs, to even say that to him. Like, yeah, I just think we have to be mindful of that. And in the midst of starting over, no matter how excruciating it feels, remember that God led us in death through Christ on the cross. So he knows what it's like to suffer for a long time. And to be honest, in ways that we will never understand. And this isn't to dismiss what you're experiencing by no means. But what this is to do is to help us continue to put some things into perspective and actually lean on God as a means to knowing that he understands, and less about, gosh, I feel like there's a great gap in distance in what I'm feeling and experiencing with you. And so even though you are in a new experience, learning new things, feels like you're dying, you're caught in the middle, it's a part of you that wants to move forward, it's a part of you that wants to go back. Perhaps it's from places of familiarity or scared of the unknown. Perhaps you are in a season in that starting over where you're being able to be invited to experience God in new heights in the way that he provides. You're having to depend on him day to day, filled with I don't knows, filled with curiosities, filled with frustrations because you just don't know what things look like. It's hard to do the simple things. It's hard to do the small things. It's hard to go back to do things that you're not used to doing because somebody has been doing them for you for so long. Now you're having to do it on your own. And it's a process of grief. It's a process of transition. It's a process where you have to depend on God every day. The question that we're left answering is, what is benefit? What is the benefit? What is the benefit? What is the benefit to starting over? And even though we could probably go through a list of so many different notable transitions where people had to start over, right? It seemed like the reset button was hit. You know, Joshua, when he is in transition, when Moses dies in Judges chapter 1, in Joshua chapter 1, rather. We talk about Samuel, who is in transition after Saul is rejected as king. How about David, when he was in transition, being anointed as a shepherd boy and then going through a process of transition between being a shepherd boy at a young age to then going to the throne at age 30. And then what about David departing from Jonathan? Gosh, I think that's a relationship piece worth talking about forever, because you talk about a transition that you didn't want. Talk about a transition that wasn't expected and that was necessary, all because he was being chased by his father. Wow. Elijah being fed by ravens. What a transition. Elijah being taken by God and Elisha remaining. Talk about transition. The disciples in the New Testament, maybe you weren't feeling me in the Old Testament, some New Testament transitions where the disciples literally abandoned Judaism and their occupations to follow Jesus. Talk about a transition. Jesus teaching on pruning in John 15, where he says, even if it bears fruit, I have to prune it so that it bears more fruit. Pruning is cutting away. The act of separating is cutting away. You have to have an ending before there's a new beginning. Some of us are still in those spaces where we're struggling with God because we are hard. We don't really believe that there's a new beginning coming at the necessity of this ending. And so we got to be willing to lean into that a little bit more. What about Paul on the road to Damascus? I mean, gosh, this brother was literally taking Christians from one place to another, persecuting them, and encounters Jesus on the road to Damascus, flips his whole life around in a moment. Still required a process. Disciples of Jesus, seeing Jesus die, to him resurrected, empty tomb, to Pentecost. I mean, gosh, we can go on and on. Transition. Abraham, go into the land that I will show you. Leave your father, your mother, your family, your kindred, and go, and I will show. Transition. Gosh, y'all. I mean, transitions are all in the scriptures. But here's the beautiful thing about starting over is that starting over is often where God intervenes and does his greatest work. And all those transitions I just listed, and all those transitions, in all of them, no matter how you slice it, all speaks to God doing his greatest work. And sometimes his greatest work comes when we are willing to release the very things that we need to release in order to experience more of him. Because if there's one thing about God and two things for sure, he does not want you to experience less of him. He's always interested in you experiencing more of him. And so if we're really willingly wanting to be those people that say, God, I want to experience more of you, please know what that comes with. Please know what that comes with. Please know the challenges that you're going to face. Please know that you're not exempt from suffering. You're not exempt from those challenges, man. You're just not. And we have to be willing to lean into that, And so, I would say this much in the act of starting over is that even though it is what God intervenes with to do his best work, it also lets us know that sometimes in his best work is when we are separated. We're losing a lot, being challenged by a lot. It's uncomfortable and unstable, but yet that's where God is. Don't allow the instability and the frustrations to be something that convinces you that God isn't present. It just means you're experiencing the human experience. It just means that you're experiencing the frustrations that many people don't want to talk about when it comes to experiencing God in such a height. And it just means that you're experiencing the human experience. And so I would say this much. It is better to start over and struggle than to remain and be dysfunctional. That's another takeaway that you want to get from this whole conversation. It is better to start over and struggle than to remain and be dysfunctional. Starting over is a risk. But I think it's a risk that is worth the reward of your healing. It's worth the reward of your healing, And so on the other side of starting over in all those stories, okay, as we read through Exodus, Israel, let's tie it all together, right? All these things that they're wrestling with in the midst of a wilderness, in the midst of a dry season, coming from a place that maybe seemed like it had all its perks, but yet was in dysfunction, to now experiencing God in different ways that they never experienced him before. And then the crash course of that, experiencing frustrations, experiencing some complaints, experiencing some doubts and setbacks, experiencing some dark spaces and seasons, some dark thoughts and struggles. What's the whole point of this? Well, on the other side of all this transition is God's promise. On the other side of enduring such a season is God's renewal and restoration. On the other side of all that God is looking to do is realignment. On the other side is new life, new light, and new language. On the other side of all of this is really the life that you have been searching for, but it just takes us being willing to endure the pain in order to get there, because we just can't go around it. We can't go around it. And I think even though that can be a sour note to end on, the beauty in not being able to go around it is the fact that God sees you worthy enough of the pain. I don't know if we ever think of it that way. Like, God actually thinks you are the right fit to endure what he's allowing you to endure, because what he's calling you to is going to require you to have a different level of capacity and spiritual maturity. And how else are we going to get this maturity? How else are we going to experience God at these new heights without experiencing these struggles, without experiencing these pains, without experiencing what it's like to kind of bump our heads through when we're in a season of starting afresh? How can we really reach this level of maturity when we keep burying our emotions and we keep burying all these things that have happened to us that are actually taking a huge effect and toll on our relationships today? The inner child in you that has yet to really be nurtured and healed, that has yet to really recover from the wounds that your parents caused unintentionally or some intentionally. Like, we got to be willing to unpack that. And I know you're afraid that things are going to mess up. Gosh, if I bring this up, it's going to mess everything up. If I say this, it's going to jack all up. If I introduce this conversation, it's going to piss them off again. And they're not even like, I'm just afraid of that. I'm afraid of pissing them off. I'm afraid of rubbing them wrong. I'm afraid of all this. I want to really encourage you that it's oftentimes in disruptions. Disruptions is what brings about God's awesome work. Disruptions is what invites God in. I wish I could tell you that you would experience God at high heights when you've got your hands in everything. But truth is, you don't. And yes, the uncertainty factor is there. And it's an opportunity for God to get in the midst. And it doesn't promise that everything will go back to normal. It doesn't promise everything will be fixed. It doesn't promise that the relationship will go back to what it was or be better. It doesn't promise that the relationship will actually be restored, or the marriage will be restored, or the job will be given back, or, I don't think any of that is the promise. I think the promise is that we can at least gather from the text is that God is there. And anywhere God is, that's where the blessing is, even if it takes some time to see. And so if you're somebody that is starting over, navigating a challenging season where starting over is very prevalent, it is very present, it's very frustrating, it was unexpected, it was blindsiding, it's not what you want, stuck in the middle, feels like you're dying, you're having to depend on God in ways like never before. I hope this conversation of processing a lot of these thoughts and feelings are extremely helpful to you, because these are some tough seasons. And regardless of wherever you're finding yourself starting afresh, starting over in, the blessing in it is that we often find ourselves getting closer to God's promises, God's provisions, God's restoration and renewal over our lives. And I think the restoration and renewal is what's worth fighting for in the end. It is. I know it looks scary. I know it looks questionable. I know it looks like it's not something that has the greatest chance of coming to fruition. I know it's dangerous. I know it's risky. But I think so was Peter being invited to walk on the waves of the ocean and sea when Jesus was walking on water. Peter took that risk. So was Abraham when he took the risk of leaving his own family and kindred to go to a land that God would show. God didn't even tell him where the land was. God didn't tell him what the land looked like. God just said, you got to take this step, and as you keep stepping, I'll show. Gosh, if that isn't a reality of my own experience currently. And yet it's our willingness to still remain faithful to God that speaks the loudest. And it's our ability to be willing to regulate ourselves in such seasons that gives us the opportunity to see the other side, which is the promise, which is God coming through and God being with us the entire time. So no matter how scary starting over can be, instead of looking at what starting over is going to cost you, I want you to actually be willing to ask yourself, what is there to gain? And after all that we've talked about, even describing the emotions to even what's available in the outcome, I hope that this is something helpful to you. Count your losses. Count your losses. Count what's available to gain on the other end, because it's not all negative. A lot of it is beneficial too. And we just have to be willing to be patient and still enough to allow God to do what he wants to do. And sometimes the stillness is uncomfortable. Sometimes the patience is uncomfortable. I wish I had all the perfect words for those of you who are in those really challenging seasons. Sometimes words aren't enough. But what I want to encourage you with is that God is present. God is near. God has not forgotten about you. And starting over oftentimes has more perks than it does its challenges. Because what's awaiting on the other side is exactly what we've been wanting this entire time, but maybe better, and more importantly, how God envisioned it, which is always greater. All right. I think I've talked your ears off long enough. Season finale is in the books. Let's clap it up. Let's clap it up. You know what I'm saying? Let's clap it up. Let's clap it up, man. Season finale is in the books. I'm so thankful for you sticking to the end of this conversation. Clips all over the place are going to be dropped soon. As we look back on some of the conversations that we've had in this season, that can prove to be so beneficial. Instead of you maybe having to digest the entire pod, you can check out the clips that'll be posted as we end one season and prepare for another. And I'm excited. I wish I could tell you all that we're going to talk about. But sometimes God has some other plans. So we're just going to keep really preparing in terms of just our studies and everything that we want to continue to incorporate to equip each and every one of us with the opportunity to continue to grow healthier relationships with God, with ourselves, and with others in the best ways possible. I'm so excited. Shout out if you know where that's from. But yeah, I appreciate you guys so much. This was such a dope season. I don't know if I have too many words for it, but it is just the beginning. It is just the beginning of so many more amazing conversations, necessary conversations that are getting ready to take place. All right. So if you haven't yet, like this video, share with a friend, subscribe if you're new, as this channel exists to build happy, healthier, whole relationships with God, with yourself, and with others, which sometimes looks like us addressing what it looks like to start over. When do we know that we're in a place of starting over and moving on from there? I typically don't do this, but I got to give you one last nugget. I typically don't do this. You stay to the end. This is the scene after the credits have rolled on your Marvel. Okay. And for some of you, this is just hitting me, and maybe this will be another video. If some of you are maybe wondering too, like, how do I know it's time to start over in my relationship? When do I know it's time to hit that reset button? I've been trying for so long. I have been waiting for so long. Lord knows I've given this everything I have, and it just seems like nothing's getting better. And I just want to know, when is it time for me to let go, to move on, and to possibly start over in my relationship? Well, I'll give you 3 ways to know. Number 1 is when the person that you're dealing with is lacking self-awareness. Self-awareness is honesty about who you are, where you're going, and what you're doing. Shout out to Dr. Zeb. Phenomenal definition. I carry it to this day. When this person is lacking self-awareness, this person is not willing to be honest about who they are, where they are. They're not willing to be honest about their behaviors, the impact of their behaviors, and willing to want to make a difference for the benefit of the connection and relationship with others. So there's a lack of self-awareness, right? Then there is, then there's another step where we're talking about, basically there is no communication. Okay. There is no communication. This person is not communicating to you what the plan is, right? What do next steps look like to really help us get on the other side of this? They're not really inviting you in to really help you understand more of where they are, understand more of where you are, and then what's the common ground to help us really get some things going in an applicable manner. There's always a communication plan. There's always a step plan. There's always an action plan that is able to be put in front of us tangibly to where we can track this. And this is what I'm saying I'm going to do. And this is what you should look for to know that I'm doing it. But then thirdly, there's progress, right? Or I guess in this term, there's a lack of progress. There is no intentionality in putting to application what was communicated in the action plan. And I think anytime that you run into those three things, self-awareness, communication, and action, when you're lacking those three, I think it's one of those things that we have to come to grips and acceptance with the fact that this isn't what it was. And it might be time to really start rethinking on what this really is. Such a challenge, because again, I think the same thing goes, and I will say this, just as much as we look at that and say, okay, those are signs to start over, I think you use those same things to determine if this is something that is worth staying in, right? This person is choosing to be self-aware and honest about who they are, where they are. This person is communicating to you an action plan, showing you step by step the things that they are wanting to do to get better at what is being presented, what is being confronted by, to create a healthier relationship. And then you are able to see progress. And again, it's not to say we're looking for immediate progress on either end, right? Like this stuff takes time, right? So you want to be gracious to give them that time to see that progress. But if you came up with an action plan, you communicated it, they were honest in where they were, they admitted to it, and you're telling me, a whole year has gone by and there's no ounce of progress, I think that's something that's a struggle. I do. And I'm not saying a year has to be everybody's timeline. I think they vary depending on what's being confronted. But at the end, we do want to be gracious enough to give that person time to progress those things. Because the last thing we want to do is be in situations where we are still addressing the same situations and same struggles for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I think that's something that we can easily see and say, this person is not actively, intentionally working on these things. And it is something worth considering. But I got to tell you, it's challenging. It's challenging. Nothing about it is easy. But the same God that I pray to, that I believe has the power and capacity to restore the same relationships that are breaking, marriages that are falling apart, connections that are on its last thread. I also believe that this is the same God that does not desire us to stay in situations that are manipulative, that are more harmful than good in the name of our religion. I just don't think that is something that God really gets behind. And I don't think it's something that we should find ourselves getting behind either, and I think it's something that we should really consider when it comes to whether or not this person is somebody worth staying for. How long do I stay until they leave? All those things I think can be answered in those three areas. Are they self-aware? Are they communicating an action plan? And are they making progress? And if you look at those three things and you're like, nah, none of that is present, and then when you bring it up to them and then nothing changes, I think you know what you got. And even in the evidence of how struggling starting over is, God does not forsake you. God does not ignore you. God sees you. And at the end of the tunnel of what you're having to start over with is restoration, renewal, realignment, new language, new life, new light. God really, really doing amazing things in you. And you getting an opportunity to experience God in ways like never before, which only increases your intimacy with him. And I think in the end, when loving and honoring him, things work out and work together for your good. All right. I appreciate you guys so much. I gotta go. So excited for what the future holds with us, continuing the process. and hold space for these conversations together. The name is Coach Sean, and until our next conversation, be easy and be breezy, my friend. Peace.